All right, in order to move any further within the tutorial, we're going to have to create a new user so that we have two users that can chat. So go ahead and create a new user called Bob at portexe.com, or you can really name it anything you'd like, and then submit it. And once you've created that user, let's go to our dashboard at Firebase and look over here. So I noticed that my chats collection disappeared, and I think it was because I had nothing inside of it. I still have users, but I don't have chats. So if yours disappeared too, just do what I'm doing here. Otherwise, you can just go ahead and use the chats that already exists. So go ahead and create a collection called chats, and we'll click next. And then you're gonna have to do this part. So we're gonna have a naming convention for each document inside of our chats collection, where each document is going to be a chat. And the document ID is going to be user1 : user2 in alphabetical order. So what do I mean by that? Well, our first chat is going to be between Zach and Bob. And the usernames are Zach at portexe.com and Bob at portexe.com. But Bob comes before Zach in the alphabet. So alphabetic order would say Bob at portexe.com. So we'll go ahead and put Bob at portexe.com : Zach at portexe.com. And we're doing this as a convention because it's going to make it really easy for us shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. And now I have this available. So let's add a couple of fields here. So we're going to have three fields. We're going to have messages, we're going to have users, and we're going to have receiver has read. So let's go ahead and do receiver has read first. And this is going to be whether or not the person who's receiving the message has read the message or not. So that's going to be a Boolean. And by default, we'll just make this specific one false. Then we're going to add another field, and we'll say this is going to be users. So all of the users involved with this chat are going to be inside of here. We'll use an array as the type. And we know that Zach at portexe is in here. And order is not going to matter here. And we also know that Bob at portexe is also in this chat. So we'll go ahead and add that. So now we have the receiver has read field and the users field. And the only other field is going to be the array of messages. So we're going to say messages is the field name, which is going to be an array. And each item inside of the array is actually going to be a map. And you can think of a map exactly like a JavaScript object, where each field of a map is a property of an object. So the properties of this map are going to be message, which is just going to be the text of the message. In this case, we'll say, hey man. And then the sender, the person who sent the message, sender. And in this case, let's just say Zach sent the first message. Zach at portexe sent the first message here. So when I click add, this is what each individual message is going to look like. It's going to be an array of these. The first message being, hey man, and the sender being Zach. And then the other properties of the document are users, so the users who are involved with this specific chat, and whether or not the receiver has read the most previous message. So let's go ahead and let's add one more message. Let's say it's going to be a map as usual. Let's say the sender this time is Bob. Let's say he's responding to Zach. So the sender is going to be Bob at portexe.com, and the message is going to say, hey, just got your message. How are you? ? So now we have two messages in here, one from Zach and one from Bob. So now what we're going to want to be able to do is see the list of messages for a specific user whenever they log in. So if I log in as Zach at I'm in caps lock, portexe.com, when I log in, all we see is hello from dashboard. But what we want to do is we want to see on the side, we want to see a list of conversations that I'm involved with. So let's go ahead and create a new folder inside of source called chat list. And then inside of this folder, we'll create two files, a styles.js file and a chatlist.js file. So I want you to go to the description and I want you to find the styles.js file for this specific chat list component. And I want you to copy it and paste it into your styles.js file for your chat list component, because we don't want to focus too much on the CSS here. We want to focus on the React stuff. So go ahead and paste this in, save it. And then we're going to want to go to the chat list, and I want you to go to the chat list file in the description below and copy all of the imports. And I want you to paste all of the imports inside of here. so that, again, we can focus solely on the React stuff. We don't have to worry about all this boilerplate code and all the imports. You can just copy and paste this stuff and we can move on with the tutorial. So what we want to do is create a class called chat_list_component, which extends react.component. Remember that each and every single component must have a render function, and the render function just simply returns some HTML. So in here I'll put a div that shouldn't be a capital D, should not be a capital D. And here I'll do a div that says hello from chat list. And we want to export this. So export default, and remember we're using with styles. So with styles, and we're gonna say styles, and then immediately invoke that with the component name, which is chat list component. And so now we are able to import this component into our dashboard, which is where we're gonna want to display that. So go over to your dashboard.js file, and I want you to import what we just created. So import chat list component from, and it's gonna be /chatlist/chatlist. And now we actually are able to have this here, and I'm going to render the div here, hello world from dashboard, but I also want to render our chat list component. And we can actually render it by using it as if it were an HTML tag, which is really great and one of the reasons why React is so amazing. So we can create a opening tag, which is going to be chat list component, and then a closing tag. And we shall save this and see an error. And what it's saying is we have to only return one element. We can't return multiple. But what we can do is wrap everything inside of a container. So we can put a container div and then put multiple elements inside of the container and then save it. And now you can see it's actually rendering both the div and our chat list component. It says hello from chat list. So now I want to kind of show you about props. Earlier I was talking about we can pass in custom props. So one of the things that we can do is, I'm just going to call this custom prop. You can call this anything you want as long as it follows the normal naming convention of variables in JavaScript. Custom prop, and then here I'm going to just set it equal to 2 + 2, and I'm going to save it. Then inside of chat list, I want to grab that prop. I want to grab it and I want to do something with it. So inside of here, inside of this div, I want to say hello from chat list. This is the prop. And then we can put in JavaScript by using the open and closing curly brace. And we're going to say this dot, it keeps doing that. Sorry about that. This dot props dot, and then we called that specific prop, we called it custom prop. So let's say custom prop, this dot props dot custom prop. And let's save that and see what ends up showing up here. It says hello from chat list. This is the prop 4, because that's what the value of this is. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this since it was just a demonstration of how props kind of work here in React. And I'm going to save here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the custom prop from in here as well. And we're going to actually add some real props very shortly. So back inside of the dashboard component here, one of the things that is unique about this component is we're not rendering this chat list component with the router. So what that means is inside of the chat list component, we're not going to have access to that prop called history that the other ones do have access to. And we're going to want to use that because when we're in the chat list, we may want to redirect somewhere. So let's go ahead and pass in a prop called history. Since we have history in the dashboard component already, since it's being processed by the router, let's go ahead and pass in this .props.history to chat list component. That'll be one of the props that we most likely will end up using. But before we continue, let's go ahead and inside of the dashboard component, create some initial state. So we have the constructor, we need to call super, and let's set this .state, which is going to be an object that has some initial state. And we're going to have a selected chat. Selected chat is going to be the index of the chat that we're currently on. So by default, that'll be null. The new chat form visible is going to be false. New chat form is going to be the form that we're going to have whenever we want to create a new chat with a friend that we don't already have a chat with. And by default, we don't want that to be visible. We're going to have an email, which is the email of the current user that's logged in. We'll set that to null by default. and we're going to want to have an array called chats, and we'll just leave that as an empty array for now. So as part of the props that we're going to be passing to this chat list component, we're actually going to want to pass a couple of functions to this component. And let's go ahead and create these functions now. We're going to have one function that's called new chat button clicked. So we're going to say new chat btn clicked, and that's going to be a function of the dashboard component that we actually end up passing in to the chat list component. So I'm going to console.log new chat button clicked so we can demonstrate this, but not yet because we want to go ahead and create the other one. The other one is going to be select chat. So select chat, and again, for now we'll just console.log, and then we'll say selected a chat. All right. So what we should do is we should go ahead and pass these functions that we just created to this child component called chat list component. So new chat btn clicked function. That's what I'm going to call this. Actually, I'll just call it new chat button function, fn. That way it's a little shorter. And then the value of this property is going to be this dot. That keeps happening. I got to fix VS Code. This dot, and we're going to pass it the function new chat button clicked. So inside of chat list, whenever we access the new chat button function property, when we say this.props.new chat button function, we'll actually be accessing this function right here. So let's go ahead and pass in the select chat function as well. So select chat fn is going to be the name of the prop, and it's going to be equal to this.select chat. All right, so now we have access to both of these functions inside of the chat list component. And we want to pass a couple of other things really quick. We're going to want to pass the chats, and we're going to set that equal to this.state.chats. We are going to want to pass the current user's email, so user email, and we'll set that equal to this.state.email. And now we have the user email, the chats, the selected chat function, the history, and the new chat button function passed directly to this chat list component that we can access from within inside of this class. The very last prop that we're going to want to send over to it is actually going to be selected chat index, which is going to be equal to this.state.selected chat. So let's take a moment to think, what is it we want to do whenever the new chat button is clicked? Well, when the new chat button is clicked, we're going to want to show the new chat form, and we're going to want to say whatever chat we've currently have selected, we're just going to want to navigate away from that. We're going to want to set this.state.selected chat to null. So let's go ahead and do both of those things. Whenever new chat button is clicked, we want to set some state. So this.set state, and we're actually going to highlight two pieces of state this time. We're going to do new chat form visible. We're going to set that equal to true. And then we're also going to access the selected chat part of the state and set that equal to null. Now for the select chat function, we want to actually have a parameter passed into here that says which chat index was selected. So the chat index will be an argument here. And when we say selected a chat, we want to log which chat index we selected. So since we're still in the dashboard component here, one of the things that we are going to want to do is check whether or not the user is signed in, because if the user is not signed in and they go to the dashboard, we want to go ahead and redirect them to the logged in page, because there's no reason to be on the dashboard if you're not signed in. And the other thing that we're going to want to do is actually grab the chats and set the state, the default state, which is going to be the email and the list of chats. So we're going to want to do that by grabbing information from Firebase. And one of the functions is actually going to be very simple. So let's go ahead and implement component will mount. So actually let's do component did mount. And component did mount is a function that will get called automatically by React whenever the component has successfully been put into the DOM. And when it's mounted into the DOM, whatever's inside of this function will then be called. So we're going to say firebase.auth. And what we want to do is say on auth state changed. And what that is it's a function provided by Firebase that says whenever some sort of auth state changes, whatever's inside of here will get called. And that is something like logging in, logging out, users being deleted, etc. So on auth state changed, what we want to do is create an async function with a parameter called user as the argument, and we want to create a function that does some stuff whenever we have an auth state change. So if not user, in other words, if the user doesn't exist, that means that there was probably a sign out. So we want to say this.props, or the user is simply doesn't exist, this.props.history.push. We want to push the user to the /login screen. Otherwise, so we'll do an else here, we want to go ahead and make a Firebase call with the current user to go ahead and grab all of the current chats. So let's go ahead and do that. Now for the previous Firebase calls, we used .then. For this one, I want to go ahead and use async await. So we already used async to demonstrate that whatever is inside of this function, there could be an await call, I guess you can call it. It's going to be an asynchronous function, and we can use await inside of this function. So let's go ahead and await Firebase.firestore so that we can access the database. .collection. The collection name that we want to access is called chats. Collection. .where. Now this allows us to query. This is some more Firebase stuff. This allows us to query where we want all the chats where the user's array contains, which is basically saying that the user's array will contain, user contains, the current user. So user.email. So what this is saying is it's going to go into the Firestore database, it's going to grab the collection chats, and it's going to return the documents where the user's array happens to contain the current user's email. So it's going to only return all of the chats where the current user is associated with that chat. And so we're going to say on snapshot, which, let's see, I need a dot, on snapshot. And this is another Firebase thing that says whenever this database document gets updated, this is going to get called. So it's going to allow us to have real-time updates. So whenever we get an update in the database, whatever's inside of this asynchronous function that we're about to create right now is going to get called. So we're going to create an asynchronous function that has a argument called result. And we want to create an array called chats, and we want to set it equal to the result.docs. And we want to map this array because .docs is a property of the result that we're going to get from the server, and it's going to be an array. And we want to map. So we want to map where each doc, we want to return doc.data. And .data just transforms it from a snapshot into an actual array of chats that we want to use. So originally when we go through and we loop through the on snapshot result, we're going to just have these specific proprietary Firebase objects. So when we call doc.data on one of those documents, it transforms it into what we would want to use in JavaScript. So if this isn't making too much sense, don't worry about it. This is some Firebase specific stuff, but we can continue on now. We want to await this.setState, and we want to await it because it turns out that setState is actually asynchronous inside of React. So whenever we set state, that's actually asynchronous. So you should keep that in mind when you're programming in React. So we want to set the email equal to usr.email, since we already have the user here. And we want to set chats equal to chats. And now we should have the state that we would expect. And the reason why I did the await is because after this, I want to console.log the state, this.state. All right, so we have an error, and it says Firebase is not defined. And that's simply because we need to require Firebase up at the top. We did not do that yet, so we have to import Firebase. So let's go ahead, go to the top here, and then go ahead and say const Firebase equals require Firebase. And then I'm going to open the log here, console, and you can see that on line 53, we're logging something. We are logging the state. Let's go ahead and look at the state and see what we have. So we have chats. We have an array of chats, and you can see we have the chat, the one between Bob and Zach, and it has an array of messages just as we'd expect. The receiver has read is still false, and the users in the chat are Zach and Bob. This is exactly what we were hoping to have. So let's move on. So if you remember, we are rendering this chat list component, and we're actually passing the chats and the user email into this chat list component. So now that array of chats and all of that stuff that we had earlier is now inside of this chat list component. So we can start working inside of the chat list component to actually display that list of chats here on the side. So let's go ahead and destructure the classes. So we'll say const classes is equal to this.props. So now that we can, because we're going to use classes a lot more than any of the other prop names, so we might as well just destructure it so we don't have to type in this.props every 5 seconds. All right, so let's get started on this. We're going to go ahead and inside of the return function here, we're going to get rid of what we have, and we are going to start putting in the real stuff here. So let's create a main tag, and we want to give it a class name, and the class name is going to be equal to classes.root. And then inside of here, we're going to want to use a button with a capital B, and we want to give it a variant that'll be equal to contained. Then we want to give it full width, and we want to say the color is equal to primary. We want to give it an onClick function, which we'll do in just a second. Give it a class name equal to classes.newChatBTN. Now let's go ahead and create a quick function down here underneath the render function, and we'll call this let's see, new chat. Yeah, let's call it new chat. And so whenever we click on this new chat button, we're going to say onClick is equal to, and whenever we click on it, we want to call the function called this.newChat. All right, so for now, we're just going to console.log new chat click. Cool. So underneath this button, we're going to want to create a list, and we're going to use the list that is provided to us by Material UI. And inside of the list, we want to put an open and curly brace because we are going to do some JavaScript. So we're going to be doing a lot of JavaScript in the rest of this series that can be a little bit intimidating to beginners. So if you are a beginner, please just try to follow along. If you don't understand something, that's perfectly fine. But if you're intermediate or advanced, you should be able to understand everything that we're doing. So I'll try to explain everything as thoroughly as I can. If there's anything that you don't understand, please feel free to ask me in the comments below. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, so inside of the list, we want to return several list items depending on the chats that we have. So we're going to loop. Well, actually, we're going to use a function of the array object called map. We're going to say this.props.chats. So we're accessing the chats that we're passing in as a property from the dashboard component. This.props.chats.map, and we're going to map. And what we're going to do is we're going to map the array items into list item elements so that we can render them. So we are going to have, we're going to say for each chat, and we'll also use the index. We want to do some stuff. And what is it we want to do? Well, we want to return a list item that we are going to create for each and every single one of the chats that we have. So create a list item, and we will have an onClick function. So onClick. So whenever we click on one of these chat list items, we're going to want to say, let's do a function that is this.selectChat, and we're going to pass the current index that we're on to that function. So let's go ahead and just create that function really quick. It's called selectChat. Takes the index, and we're just going to log selectChat, and let's also log the index. All right, so we have the onClick function. Let's go ahead and add a class name. So class name is equal to, and that's going to be classes.listItem. And then we're going to have a property called selected. And when selected is set to true, it's going to be highlighted. And whenever selected is not true, it's not going to be highlighted, so that we can see on the bar whenever a chat is selected, we can see which chat is selected because it'll be highlighted on the sidebar. So we will say selected. And how are we going to determine whether or not this chat is selected? We're going to say this.props. Since we have access to the current chat index, we can say this.props.selected chat index. I think that's what we called it, right? So if we go to the dashboard, we can see selected chat index is the property that we're passing in. So we have access to that. And if that's equal to the current index that we're on, then we want that to be true. It looks like I put that on the outside by accident. Let me quickly fix that. So if this.props.selected chat index is equal to the index that we're currently on while we're looping through inside of map, then we know that we are on the currently selected chat. So we'll go ahead and set selected equal to true. Now align items, we're just gonna set equal to flex start. And what are we gonna put inside of this list item? We want this list item to look like it has some content inside of it that makes sense when in the context of a chat item. So we are going to put a list item avatar. And what this is going to be is it's going to be a little circle that kind of could be a profile picture if you would like it to, but for now it's just going to be a circle with the first letter of the person's username. So if it's Zach@portexe.com, it'll be Z. If it's Bob@portexe.com, it'll be B, etc. So inside of the list item avatar opening tag, you're still inside of that opening tag. We're going to put in a property called primary. And primary is going to be the content that goes inside of this list item text. And we want to go ahead and, like I said, use the first letter of their username. So what we are going to do is a little bit of JavaScript magic. We're going to go ahead and do, let's see, sorry, it's not going to be primary. Let's backspace out of this. Sorry if that was a little confusing. Inside of list item avatar, we're going to create an avatar tag. There we go. And in between these avatar tags, we'll go ahead and put some JavaScript in between the curly braces. Now let's do what it is I was saying we were going to do. So we're going to do some JavaScript magic, which is going to be underscore chat, because we are looping through the chats, and then the current chat we're on is set equal to underscore chat. So underscore chat dot users, which is a property of the chat, because if you remember, we have in each chat object is a field called users. And we're going to say dot filter, because it's an array of users. We want to filter the array for each user. We want to have the user that is not equal to this.props.user email. User email. Now, if you remember, inside the dashboard component, we have user email being passed as a prop. So what this is saying so far is that we're going to loop through the users array, and we're going to find the one that's not us. We're going to find the one that is not us. And it's going to return an array, which should only have one item because the users array only has two items, your username and your friend's username. And so when it returns that, it's going to return your friend's username in an array, so we can access that by using the 0 index. But then we are going to only want the very first letter of that username. So we're going to split that username. And when we split it as an empty string, when we say split with an empty string, what it's doing is breaking that string down into an array where each item in the array is a character of that string. So if we want the first letter, we would say 0 index of that. Okay, so I know that was pretty crazy, but there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff in this tutorial. And that's why I was saying you probably want to be pretty familiar with JavaScript to follow along at this point. So the other thing that we want to add to avatar inside of the opening tag is an alt. And we want to set that equal to Remy sharp. All right. So let's go ahead and underneath the list item avatar, let's create some list item text. And then this is where it's going to be inside of the opening tag. Okay, we're going to go inside of the opening tag and we're going to create a primary. And we're going to set that equal to some JavaScript. So this is going to be the text inside of the component, the main text inside of the list item. So what we want as the main text inside of the list item is the username. So we want the username inside of primary. So what we will do is the exact same thing we did up here to grab the friend's username. So we'll just copy this without the split part. So we just want it without the split part, because instead of just the first letter, we actually want the entire name so that we can display that. And then underneath the primary, we're going to have a secondary. which is going to be the text that appears underneath the header. Give me just 1 second. All right, and what that's going to be is it's going to be the actual chat text, except we don't want to display all of the text because it's not going to fit. It's not going to fit inside of there. We only want maybe the first 30 characters to display. So in between these two curly braces, we want to create a React fragment, react.fragment, which is just going to be basically a span. And inside of here, we want to put some typography. And this is going to be a component equal to span. And the color, let's set that equal to text primary. That's built in. All right, so the text that we want inside of this typography component is going to be the chat message, but only the first 30 characters of it, okay? So we're gonna have some JavaScript inside of here, and we're gonna say underscore chat, so the current chat we're on, dot messages. We wanna get the very latest message, so we're going to say, we're gonna access the index of chat, underscore chat, dot messages. If I can type, that'd be great. Dot length -1, so that we can grab the very last chat message in the array. And then we're gonna say dot message because that's a property of the messages, and we're going to use dot substring, which is built into JavaScript. And we're gonna say we want from the 0th character all the way up to the 30th character. And so it's only going to display the first 30 characters of the very last chat message. All right, we got through that, guys. Let's move on. So one thing that we're gonna want is in between each and every single list item, we're gonna want a dividing line. So I'm gonna put a divider here and then just simply have the closing tag directly underneath it. Now, it's the same as up here, we're returning a parent div with a bunch of divs inside of it. If you remember, I was saying you cannot return multiple elements, you have to wrap it inside of a container. Well, the exact same thing actually applies when we are returning multiple things inside of a map function. So inside of here, we're actually returning multiple things. We're returning a list item and a divider. So we're gonna have to cut this and wrap it inside of a div container. So go ahead and create a div and put all of this inside of it. Now, when you have multiple things that are rendered, when you have multiple elements that are rendered, you have to give it a key. So what do I mean by that? So whenever we have this div, you see we're gonna have multiple of these because we're looping through, and React wants us to give it a key. So we have to give it a key. And we can just use the index. Since we're using each index, we can just go ahead and set the key equal to the index. Now let's save this and see what happens so far. So this looks pretty crazy. We have some errors, and we're gonna get around to that in just a moment so that we can fix that problem. But as you can see, we actually have some stuff being displayed, which is good news. So the first thing that we're gonna wanna change here is we're gonna want to make sure that we actually have chats before we try to render chats. Because if we don't have chats and we try to render the chats, we're gonna get an error. So let's take this entire return statement here and let's cut it. And below classes, inside of the render statement, we're gonna check. We're gonna say if this.props.chats.length is greater than 0, then we wanna go ahead and render all this stuff. Let's save and see what this looks like. As you can see, you get this massive error. And what this is saying is we are actually not rendering anything here. And that makes sense because we're saying if this.props.chats.length is greater than 0, then we're rendering it. Otherwise, we're really not rendering anything at all. And we actually have to render some stuff. We have to actually render something. So we're gonna have to put an else here. All right, so inside of else, let's actually render some generic stuff really quick. Let's basically render the same thing that we rendered up there, but kind of empty. So we'll have a main, and we'll give it a class name, and we'll set that class name equal to classes.root, just like above. And then in here, we'll have the button, with a capital B, make sure it's the capital B, and it'll be the same button with the variant as contained, and the full width, and on click will still be equal to this.newChat. Then we will have the class name. That's also going to be the same, which is going to be equal to classes .newChatBTN. And inside of here, just as before, we'll say new chat, we'll say new message, and I'll go ahead and bring this down to the next line so that it looks consistent. And then below that, we'll just have an empty list. So we'll have an empty list. And we can save, and this error should now go away. Now we see a different error. This error is coming from the fact that in the else statement, we're just putting some HTML. We actually have to return it. So we'll go ahead and put return, and then inside of here, just paste back what we had, save, and now we have no errors at all, except for this specific one. Let's go ahead and address this final error. Okay, so this error was actually coming from the fact that inside of button here, we forgot to actually put some text, and we actually need to have some text. So we're gonna say new message inside of this button here at the top. And let's go down to this one, and let's make sure that we put color is equal to primary here. All right, so now that we have these two things, this should now render without us getting that error, and we were correct. So let's see what happens when I click this message. When I click this message, you can see that it says select chat 0 because it's the 0th chat. You know that in arrays, 0 is always the first index and we only have 1. So we know that this is in fact the 0th chat. So we know that this is working as we were hoping it would. So let's go ahead and get rid of this hello world from dashboard up here. We don't need that anymore. Let's see, where is that? That's being rendered right here. Let's get rid of that. We can save. And yeah, so this is what we would expect right here. We would see the dashboard. We would have on the left, we would have the list of chats, and then we can click it and we can see the chat over here. And so in the next video, we're gonna probably work on getting the actual chat to display over here. All right, guys, that was it for this video. This video is a little bit more complicated than the rest of them, and it's gonna kind of be getting more complex as we go throughout. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.